Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by CJ Vogel. Going to talk about everybody's favorite subject right now, the Texas offensive line. The good, the bad, and the unknown. We'll talk about that here on this latest edition of On Texas Football, which is brought to you by Duck Camp. We'll tell you more about Duck Camp here later in the show. But On Texas Football fam, don't forget, use the promo code ONTexas25 to save 25% off of your order at duckcamp.com. CJ, this is directly taken from your piece you wrote over at ontexasfootball.com on Sunday, and that's what you titled it, Offensive Line Talk, the good, the bad, and the unknown. Let's start with the good. I think the bad and the unknown, we've covered that a lot here on the channel, but let's start with the good. And for you, it starts with two really, really good bookend tackles with Trevor Gooseby deciding to put off the NFL for a year and Texas going into the portal to get Melvin Siani from Wake Forest.
Yeah, no, I think that is absolutely the strength of this offensive line is probably a really important factor for your offensive line is being able to protect against some of the best edge rushers, not only in the SEC, but the entire country, right? Texas will be facing Ohio State once again. You look at LSU, Tennessee's on the list. A&M and Oklahoma will always have elite pass rushers. To have first-team all-conference SEC left tackle Trevor Gooseby returning, and to add Melvin Siani from Wake Forest, you have a really talented duo right there. And just to kind of put it in perspective, according to PFF, and this is, again, kind of the closest thing that we have for, kind of solidified statistics for the offensive line, Jeff, 3 sacks and 16 pressures were what Trevor Gooseby allowed last year. He allowed a sack in every single loss Texas had, 3 on the year. You go look at what Melvin Siani did in the ACC with Wake Forest. How about 0 sacks and only 9 pressures allowed? I know that's not SEC level competition out there, but that should give you a little bit of an understanding of how talented this duo could be, especially in pass protection with Arch Manning. Boy, that gets you excited.
So let's look at the other part of the good, CJ. Connor Robertson coming back is a part of that because now you've got a center that has some starting experience. But Cole Hudson going into the year in 2025 had starting experience. It just wasn't at center. So at least you've got Connor Robertson with some starts under his belt. And unlike last year where you had Brandon Baker, who had no starting experience, and whoever was going to be the guard opposite DJ Campbell, whether it was Connor Stroh or Neto Moslow, whoever it was, it ended up being a guy with no starts. But CJ, in the good, you point out that this projected starting offensive line, which is Trevor Gooseby at left tackle, Dylan Sikorsky at left guard, Connor Robertson at center, Brandon Baker at right guard, Melvin Siani at right tackle. All of these guys have at least 6 games of starting experience. Dylan Sikorsky's 6 starts last year at Oregon State makes him the least experienced starter on this line. That's at least in a better spot than you were to going into 25.
And again, that's the projected, way too early look at 2026. That's kind of what the expectation going into the spring will be, is that starting 5. So we'll see. Does Sikorsky hold on to left guard? Does Texas find somebody else? Or does a Jordan Coleman make things really interesting? Does an Andre Kojo or Jaden Chapman push for left guard? But altogether, Jeff, you mentioned it. This is a better spot from an experience standpoint than what Texas entered 2025 with, right? You didn't quite know what Brandon Baker would provide. Whoever it was going to be at left guard did not have a start in their career, right? Neto didn't play. Connor Stroh didn't have any starts. So you were basically at an unknown there going into last season. And right now, at the very least, you have someone who has started at a game or 6 to this point at every single position. That is, a step in the right direction. We'll see how quickly they're able to gel in the spring, however.
Dylan Sikorsky is going to be a theme here when we talk about the bad, not necessarily where some people's minds might go. But, CJ, let's start with the big one. And I know Jerry Hamilton's talked about it. You and I have talked about it. I think everybody to a man here on the channel has talked about it. Penalties have got to get fixed. You look at Dylan Sikorsky at Oregon State. I don't care what competition you're playing against. 441 snaps last season, 0 penalties. But, CJ, you go to Brandon Baker at right tackle, and again, in this projection, he's kicking inside the guard. 12 penalties, one of the most penalized offensive tackles in the SEC and all of FBS last year. This offensive line, CJ, you've got to cut down on the penalties, and in particular, the pre-snap penalties with this group. You're shooting yourself in the foot with those.
Yeah, and again, that goes towards the growth that we saw with Brandon Baker. Towards the back end, the penalties died down quite a bit, right? But when you're inexperienced and you're making your first ever start against Ohio State, it makes sense to see some jitters. And, of course, that continued for a little bit, Jeff, with Baker. But altogether, penalties have to improve, right? And that's team-wide. Offensive line obviously gets a lot more of kind of the blame there because there's 5 of them on the field at a time. But penalties have to die down, whether it's snap infractions, whether it's false starts, offsides, whatever, holdings, blocking the hands of the face, doesn't matter. Penalties have to die down this year. I'll say this again about Sikorsky. 0 penalties, and you kind of alluded to it. 0 penalties over 440 snaps.
Yeah.
That's pretty darn impressive. So, again, will he be the option at left guard? We'll have to wait and see. But altogether, that's something that I look at and say, yeah, it makes sense why Missouri, Arkansas, and Tennessee all wanted this kid because he can play the run and he doesn't commit penalties. That's something that I look at and say, okay, teams that figure out the offensive line value that. They prioritized it. Texas won out. Now let's see if he can translate that to playing well for the Longhorns.
To your point about Brandon Baker's penalties, 5 of those, so 5 of the 12, almost half of them came in 2 games. He had 2 against Ohio State, 3 against Florida. But CJ, he had a nice stretch in there. Oklahoma, no penalties. Kentucky, 1 penalty. Mississippi State, none. Vanderbilt, none. Georgia, none. Did have 2 against Arkansas, but came back with 0 penalties in that home win over Texas A&M. So to your point, kind of what you would almost expect from an inexperienced offensive lineman, even though he's really talented. When it was good, man, it was really good. But when it was bad, it was really bad.
Yeah, and I think in that Arkansas game specifically, what was there, 25 or 26 combined penalties? So refs were just looking to throw flags for any reason in that game. But as you said, that second half of the year for Brandon Baker, the growth was very impressive.
No doubt. CJ, let's go to snaps at guard. That's next on the bat. And again, 441, that's the snaps for Dylan Sikorsky. The gap from number 1 to number 2 could fill the Grand Canyon and then some, because you go from Dylan Sikorsky at 441 to Jaden Chapman at 31, CJ. And then, so we talk about the Brandon Baker thing. I know one of your red flags for offensive linemen in the portal, no position conversions. How do you feel about the in-house position conversion with Brandon Baker potentially kicking inside?
Yeah, I guess it's a yellow flag because he knows the system. He's been around. He knows the calls. He understands how Arch and Connor Robertson kind of, maneuver around protections. So I don't love it still. Obviously, I'd prefer, a seamless position transition for guys coming into 2026 to kind of construct this offensive line. But if it's going to be someone that has to move a position, if it's someone that's been in the system, Jeff, that makes sense, right? But it's going to be interesting because, again, the guard spot is uniquely different. And I know folks are sitting there saying his frame, his body type might project better towards the NFL as a guard, but that's for the NFL, right? I thought Baker, again, towards the back end, played well at tackle. So to move into guard, I think is going to be a learning curve. I don't think he ever played it at modern day. And again, only 1 career snap there. It's an unknown.
At least, and this will be one of my talking points all offseason, at least you don't open the year with Ohio State. Texas State's a quality G6 club, but at least you get a G6 club to open the year. You don't have to go to Columbus and roll this out to see what it looks like. So at least you get a little bit of margin for error. But CJ, that's about the extent of the margin for error we're going to talk about on the offensive line, because as we go to the unknown, and I think this is the big one, what does the run game look like? That was the first one you listed on the unknown. And we know Texas has been really wide zone dependent. I've said a lot in the last 2 years, I think 2 wide zone dependent. CJ, what do you think this run game could look like? Because I think the challenge for Sark and Kyle Flood to marry the personnel to whatever the preferred run game scheme is, that to me is going to be the thing that determines whether this works or not.
What could it look like? I don't know, and I hate to shoot down the question, but that's why I was in the unknown, right? But Jeff, to your point, Texas needs an interior running ability, right? They have to run through the tackles. And last year they weren't able to. 2024, it was very much a challenge given the personnel in the backfield. But with Raleek Brown, Hollywood Smothers, we'll see what happens with Derek Cooper, Michael Terry, right? James Simon's going to be in that conversation. You should have more capable between the tackles running. Mm-hmm. And again, right now, I just don't know what it looks like given the guard situation. I think you like what you have with Connor Robertson returning. I thought he played well towards the back end of the year. But again, is he a mauler up front? Probably not. Can he move people? I think so, especially going into a final season of 5th year. But that's going to be the big question mark, is if you can run between the tackles, well, there's an extra element to your offense that, quite frankly, you haven't had over the last 2 seasons.
All right, CJ, let's give a shout out to our sponsor for this edition of On Texas Football before we wrap this up. That's our friends over at Duck Camp. Duck Camp makes gear for folks who live for being out there, whether that's in a duck blind at sunrise or on the 40 acres for a Saturday kickoff. Born right here in Austin, Duck Camp builds best-in-class hunting and fishing apparel. Works just as well for a full day in the field as it does for a long day of tailgating, from sun protection shirts that keep you cool during those early season scorchers. Man, I can't wait to avoid those again. To their iconic game series hats that feel like instant classics, Duck Camp gear is ready for football season, hunting season, and every season in between. Get out there, stay out there, and hook them. Shop Duck Camp at duckcamp.com. And On Texas Football fam, don't forget, use the promo code ONTexas25 for 25% off of your order at duckcamp.com. CJ, as we wrap this up and we're talking about the unknowns with the offensive line, I want to ask you this before we get into immediate depth and we talk about what the run game could look like. It almost feels, I don't want to say they're doubling down on being a wide zone running team, but this does feel like it looks like the way they're constructing this, again, let's assume it's the projected starting 5 that we've laid out there. It does feel like a more athletic group than maybe some of the groups they've tried to put together from left tackle to right tackle. You agree with that?
I do agree with that. And I say that because I don't know if it could have gotten less athletic at times last year, right? And I don't, it was a harsh thing to say, but, there were multiple plays throughout the year where you had 3 or 4 offensive linemen on their backs and no defensive linemen on their backs or displaced. So, being able to sustain your feet, being able to climb to the second level, being able to pull, I think at times is something that Texas quite frankly was unable to do, especially with their guards a year ago. So yeah, absolutely, more athleticism and more foot quickness is something that I think will greatly benefit this unit next year, and in turn help that pocket stay clean for Arch Manning.
Not only do they pull their guards in the run game, Texas also, if you look at it, they do pull their guards in pass pro quite a bit, depending on what the protection is. So again, they need guys that were maybe a little more fleet of foot, kicking Baker inside, getting Sikorsky. That could go a long way towards closing that athleticism gap. But CJ, as we finish up the unknown, immediate depth, and we talked about for most O-line coaches, that number is going to be 8. So if we assume that's your first 5, to find that next 3, which is probably a guy that can play left or right tackle, basically your number 3 tackle, an interior guy that hopefully has the ability to play center a little bit, and then kind of maybe a swing guy that he can play all over the place. Maybe Jaden Chapman, Andre Kojo, and Jackson Christian right now might be your top 3, with Jordan Coleman trying to get his way in there. How do you see it right now, CJ?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting, right? How does Kojo return from his ACL, right? That obviously is very difficult. We saw that with CJ Baxter. We saw that with Derek Williams. Now add 335 pounds or 340 pounds to Kojo's frame. And, is he able to move the way that we just explained it, right? Foot quickness, agility, and being able to pull or, kick slide, right? That's going to be really interesting for Kojo. I don't know what to think about Jaden Chapman, if I'm being completely honest, right? He's been around the system for a long time. He's been in the weight strength and conditioning program for a long time. And when Texas desperately needed another option to play guard last year, his name, just didn't come up a whole lot. So will he be someone that is restricted mostly to being a swing tackle for you? We'll have to wait and see. Jonte Newman also in that conversation as a redshirt freshman. But beyond that, what does that immediate depth piece look like for Texas? It's going to have to be someone that steps up. And I know Texas fans are sitting there saying, well, we've heard Daniel Cruz's name and Nate Kibble's name, and we didn't ever see him. And I understand that. But it's going to have to be a Jordan Coleman or a Jackson Christian to back up that center position. Someone that will have to emerge as a youngster to step in and be a guy that, should Texas need a 7th or 8th offensive lineman, they can be relied upon. And I'll also add this. I don't know. I think it's too early to kind of project John Turntine into this conversation. Yeah. Folks are excited about it. I'm excited about him. He's one of my top 5 prospects in this class. Can't wait to see what he does, but he's got to get the frame right before he ever steps foot on the field. And right now, I think there's a ways to go to get to that SEC ready frame that we all see on the offensive line.
Nicholas Robertson is the one for me in the signing class that I really wish he was here for spring ball, not just because of the size, but CJ, you don't realize how important a backup center is until you need to go to the backup center. But the fact that he's got the potential to be a guy who can snap a little bit, I think would be good. CJ, I'll put you on the spot with this is to close it out. As we sit here right now in late January 2026, is the Texas offensive line better, worse, or about the same right now as it was during the 2025 season?
I think it will be better in pass protection. Again, with those bookends at the tackle position, how can you not be excited about a fourth-year Gooseby and Siani coming in with only 9 total pressures allowed? Now, it might start similarly in the run game. And again, I think that's more of the unknown is, will you be able to run between the tackles and move people? That's the big question for me. What does it look like whenever they line up and need a yard or two, Jeff?
Yeah,
that's been a bit of a stalemate for Texas over the last few years. So I'm excited for this group. Optimistically, outlook is, I think, the best way to put it. But yeah, I think it'll be better in pass protection, especially with Baker spinning in, knowing this is a pass pro guy.
And maybe with Trevor Gooseby maybe being out for a little bit or most of spring practice after getting the shoulder cleaned up, maybe that's an opportunity for a Jaden Chapman or a Jonte Newman, somebody to step up and claim one of those depth pieces that right now we just don't know exactly how it's going to all fit together. CJ, thank you for the knowledge and expertise as always. Thank you to Matthew behind the scenes for producing it. Thank you to our friends over at Duck Camp for sponsoring it. If you're not a member over at ontexasfootball.com, you have a couple of days left to take advantage of our Portal Madness special. First-time subscribers get your first month of access at ontexasfootball.com for just $1. But do not wait any longer. You have until Saturday. At close of business Saturday, this offer will go away. So if you've been thinking about it, don't waste any more time. Get over to ontexasfootball.com. And again, first-time subscribers get your first month of access on the site for just $1. For CJ, for Matthew, for the entire On Texas Football staff, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And until next time, hook 'em.